Okay. Well, welcome to GrantTree Fundamentals. I feel like this is like the first episode of the second series. Yeah, today we're going to talk about non-violence, and there are a couple of reasons for that, and I've got a couple of slides that we need to explain. If anybody's watching this video and isn't in the room and has any comments, then feel free to come and grab me, or if you're outside GrantTree, then email me, andrew@granttree.co.uk. This is why we want to talk about non-violence, right? These are some of our aims of kind of GrantTree from a cultural point of view. You know, we want an environment and a culture that supports trust, wholeness, collaboration, creativity. These things for me are absolutely essential to making like self-management and non-hierarchical working a success. Another way of looking at it is we want to create somewhere where we all want to work, we want to create an environment where, you know, going back to our purpose, where we can all fulfill our potential. And for me, non-violence is a powerful tool to make this happen. In fact, I'd probably say that it's the single most powerful tool that we have at our disposal to make all of this kind of stuff work. You know, I think we all agree that non-violence is a good thing, and I think at GrantTree we're much better at embracing this kind of way of being and working than a lot of other people. So, you know, we're making really good progress. But we want to get better still. We want to fulfill our potential. We want to have more of us at our best in the business. But Dan and I were talking about this over the week, and it's one of these things that's kind of quite hard to pin down. You know, what constitutes violent behaviour and what constitutes non-violent behaviour. And also over the coming weeks we're going to be talking about things like the resolution process and the check-in protocol and, you know, kind of communications and stuff in general. So it felt like it would be worth spending some time today talking about this and, you know, as is always our aim at GrantTree Fundamentals, trying to bring us all to a kind of common understanding so that we've got a place where we can start from and talk together. It's a very text-heavy presentation this week, I'm afraid. You know, maybe you prefer it, I don't know, let me know. Feedback always welcome. So I wanted to start by saying what non-violence is not, because I think it's easy to sort of, you know, see it and jump to some conclusions. The first thing is it's not NVC, which is non-violent communication, which is an excellent book, by the way, by Marshall Rosenberg, which is on Dropbox in the culture stuff folder. And it's kind of confusing because obviously NVC, non-violent communication, it makes it sound like but it's not the same, right? NVC is one framework, it's one way of communicating non-violently or assertively, but it's not the only way. So NVC is non-violent, but non-violence is more than NVC. And assertively, in this sense, is a kind of piece of psychological jargon, where assertive communication is communication that's not passive, not aggressive, and not passive-aggressive. So it's about non-violent communication. And that's kind of weird because obviously the way that we use assertive, you know, outside that is a kind of, to be kind of forceful or pushing. So it's a weird choice that psychologists have made to use the help. Non-violence is also not a super weapon. Right? A super weapon is something that you can use to shut down any conversation that you don't want to have. You know, like this kind of microaggressions movement, or people who basically want to say, you know, because I'm a feminist, I can point to anything and say, you know, you have to shut up because I'm a feminist, using feminism as a weapon, as opposed to saying, you know, like what feminism really is. So we have to remind ourselves that we're trying to help each other express ourselves and communicate more clearly. So non-violence is not a tool to close down conversations, it's a tool to open up conversations, to say, actually, what's the message that we're trying to get across to each other here, really? You know, and is there a better way that we could be with each other and communicate?
By the way, on the super weapon stuff, it's a term that we've taken from a blog post by a guy called Scott Alexander, who writes absolutely fucking brilliant blog posts. If you're curious, I can send you the link. It's a nice long blog post, but he explains like also conversational tools that make conversation very difficult on the internet and in real life as well. But it's a very fascinating blog post, so let me know if you'd like the link.
Yeah, it's really interesting, really interesting. I think it's also important to say that non-violence is not passivity. You know, it's not just kind of standing by and letting people walk all over you. You know, like, you know, if we think of people who embody non-violence, Gandhi is obviously the best example. And I'm not saying that we're Gandhi, right? It's a bit grandiose. But if you want to see, you know, non-violence doesn't mean standing by. It doesn't mean that you can't do anything or achieve anything. And it's not about having low standards. It's not about saying that we can't be angry or criticize each other or be direct or be in conflict. You know, and actually, non-violence is about making these things happen more effectively, right? Allowing ourselves to have conflict and have anger within the business in a way that's better managed, so that, right, by doing these things more effectively, we can have all of those things from the first slide. Because if you want to have good collaboration, if you want to have creativity, if you want a space where you can bring wholeness, you need a space in which conflict and honesty and criticism and all of these things are happening in a non-violent way. So you're not compromising the safety of the space, but you're not compromising on your ability to communicate either. And for me, like, one way of looking at it is to say, you know, we want to create a nurturing environment. And that's really important. Like, when I'm doing the culture work, I'm always thinking about my experience of GrantTree and the fact that I have found this an enormously nurturing place to be, and that my life is a better place for me to inhabit as a result of having worked there. You know, I'm happier in my own skin, I'm a better person for having worked here, and I'm really keen to say, look, non-violence and the kind of tools of compassion and compassionate communication, whatever way you want to get into this, is one really powerful way that you can change your life, right? And the, you know, GrantTree and the working culture that we have here should help with that. You know, we co-create our culture. This is a thing that I said a lot in the first season of GrantTree Fundamentals. You know, if we want the culture to be a certain way, we have to understand that we have a part to play in that. It's not just going to happen. The way that we act and think is going to influence that.
And there's an element there where we, by accepting certain practices around us or by rejecting those practices, we create our own space, and we're all responsible for that. So it's not possible to have an edict from on high that says there shall be non-violence. That doesn't exist. What exists is to make everybody aware of what is violent and what is non-violent behavior, and therefore to allow every person in the company to be able to recognize that and call it out and say, like, hey, I think there's some violent communication going on here. Can we rephrase it? Can we approach this differently?
When we say that open culture is about power, trust and freedom, my favourite catchphrase, freedom here is freedom from violence. You know, it's about existing in a non-violent environment. So open culture in Teal is by definition, you know, like a non-violent place. And actually this kind of compassion, non-violent communication is a great route into that. And as I said, like, you know, it can kind of be life-changing because it changes the way that you relate to other people, and it changes the way that you relate to yourself. I think it's important to say that we're never going to do this perfectly. In fact, we're always going to be getting it wrong because we're human beings, right? And we're going to be tired, or we're going to be hungry, or we're going to be stressed, or we're going to be thinking about other things. And so, you know, we're not going to get it right. But having a common understanding of what we think is okay and what isn't, right, which is part of what this presentation is about, starting that conversation, and recovering well when we fail, so pointing it out to each other, or noticing that we behaved actually in a way that wasn't cool and then dealing with that, is really important. And, you know, I would say that if you take none of the rest of this presentation, if you want the TLDR on the whole thing, having an intention to be kind to one another and thinking about kindness is the most powerful thing that we can do to create a non-violent culture. Violence is kind of hard to spot some of the time, right? It's something that leaves us feeling uncomfortable or unhappy, but maybe we're not quite sure why. Here's a little bit of psychological theory that I thought I might share with you. I find this very interesting. This is by a guy called James Gilligan, who did a lot of study of prisoners in the US. He said, I've yet to see an act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed. And he also said that shame, like cold, is the absence of warmth, and is experienced like cold as a feeling of numbness or deadness. There's also a superb TED talk by Brené Brown about vulnerability and shame. If you haven't watched it, I really recommend that you watch it. It's a life-changing talk. She's a superb speaker. And she talks about exactly this, about how, you know, shame is disconnection from ourselves, disconnection from our needs, from our humanity, from our emotions. And that's the place that violence comes from. So actually creating a non-violent workplace is creating a workplace without shame. And if people remember the team toxins, again, it's in the culture bit of the Dropbox, it was something we looked at earlier in the year with Stephen Kuhn originally. Those things like blame and defensiveness and contempt and stonewalling and flooding, those are all species of shame. They're all kinds of disconnection. So it's through those kind of experiences that we have, that we come to kind of to violence. This comes back to the fact that we're always going to get it wrong. So what do you do when you're around violence? The first thing to do is just notice it. So rather than have an experience of I feel really stressed after getting this email or this voicemail or this conversation or this Snapchat message, I sort of don't know why and I just don't like it and I'm kind of unhappy. Actually having a framework to be able to look at it and say, oh, actually I think I detect, I think this might be a little bit of a violent email, and that's, you know, just understanding why we're feeling that way. It can also sometimes be useful. It's not always useful, but sometimes it can be useful to point it out, right? But obviously, don't be violent when you point out violence. Don't be blamey when you're pointing out blame. So, don't just say, oh, there's a violent conversation, I'm not going to take part in it. But, use the usual rules of like assertive communication, stick to I statements, don't cross the net. Crossing the net is when you attribute certain intentions to other people. You speak from what you can see, from your feelings, from your observations. The classic, you said X, I felt Y. These are the kind of phrases that I find really useful. Like, has this conversation got a bit violent or a bit blamey, or or even if you catch yourself doing it, wait, was that statement a bit blamey? Was I blaming you there? Just kind of exploring it in a, in whatever way works for you.
It's worth noting on the noticing. So even if the other person maybe is not in the right frame of mind to receive to have a conversation about whether they're being violent or not, just noticing that the reason why you're feeling in a certain way is because you received some communication that you identify as violent can help you deal with that much better. So it's the difference between just feeling ways for reasons you don't understand and saying, oh, okay, so I received an email that was quite aggressive and now I feel upset about this. So that's why I feel upset about it. So you kind of have a handle on it. Even if the other person doesn't cope, that already helps you. So that's why it's important to be able to sort of identify those signs. And as Andrew said, the first sign is a feeling of discomfort and disconnection after reading or after interacting.
By noticing, you give yourself more choice about the feeling, right? So you're no longer just saying, oh, I'm feeling stressed, whatever that means to you. I'm feeling stressed as a result of reading that email. It's like, oh, okay, it's because of the way that person expressed themselves. And then actually coming back to, like remembering that violence is like an experience of shame. I think, well, if that person has spoken violently, then there must be some need they have that they disconnected from, right? There was something that they wanted that they didn't get. And actually, maybe I can, rather than receive this email and feel stressed as a result of it, I can see that actually it's spoken to me in a way that I find aggressive. And that's a reflection of the fact that they're a human being with needs. Well, I'm a human being with needs. And sometimes my needs aren't met. And maybe this means that actually we can build some compassion from that person, some understanding, and suddenly you've exercised choice, and you're not angry anymore, and you're able to say, oh, what was the message that this person actually wanted to send to me? And maybe I can hear that message, and maybe I can help them by hearing that message. And then you just have a more positive experience of being in the world. So this is what the rest of the presentation is going to be. Like, it's not always clear. Like, we think, okay, we know what violence is and non-violence is. Yeah, we've got that. But actually, you start to look at it, and it becomes quite subtle. And you're like, well, is this? Is it like if you've read NBC, they're very anti the word should. You think, oh, I just used a sentence with the word should. Does that mean I've been violent? It becomes quite hard to work. It becomes quite subtle.
It's interesting because we were talking about where we're trying to use the analogy of physical violence and saying, well, physical violence is very easy to spot. Actually, if you start thinking, obviously, like somebody being punched in the face is kind of obviously physically violent. But there's also forms of physical violence that can be less easy to spot. Stalking somebody, for example, is a form of physical violence, so physical presence that's being imposed on somebody that they don't wish. It is a physical violence, but it's not like it's following somebody always violent. There's question marks even in terms of physical violence. So let alone in terms of verbal or communication violence, where obviously communications tend to be much more subtle than just physical actions. And so these kind of things can help spot what's going on when it's not entirely clear.
Yeah. There's a really helpful concept which Dan introduced me to called code smells, which is a nice little programming idea, which is, things that if you see them in code might indicate that something bad or unhelpful is going on. Not necessarily, but it's like a sign that something might be going on. And the more of them that you see, the more likelihood that there really is a problem happening. So this is about, as I said, this presentation is about starting the conversation to help us build a common understanding of what are those signs that we should be looking out for, so that we can help ourselves and we can help each other get better at doing this, so that we're ultimately going to communicate better, we're going to have a culture that's more open for creativity, collaboration, etc. So we've got a few different, there are lots, this is a non-exhaustive list, right, but we've got a few different kinds of code smells that you might be looking for, that might be helpful to you. We're going to introduce them, and then I think we'll go into discussion after we've... Yeah. So the first one is kind of the most obvious, right? Intimidation, explosion. Endangering other people's feelings of safety. So obviously physical violence, but also like shouting, storming off, slamming down the phone. It's not something that we can do so much now that we've got mobiles, but I have had in previous jobs the phone slammed down on me by clients. It's not a pleasant experience. And there's more subtle stuff as well, right? If you say to somebody, this conversation is over, in a very calm voice, is that storming off? You know, is that sort of saying, is that right? What about saying, toughen up? You know, in other words, you're trying to express your feelings to me in some way and you're not allowed. Is that intimidation?
There's an interesting one about toughen up, because if you say to somebody, shut up, people would recognize that as verbal violence. You don't say shut up to people. But toughen up is kind of a way to say shut up about your feelings. And we wouldn't accept shut up about your feelings, but for some reason we accept toughen up. Interesting.
Demeaning speech and action. That's another one that, again, it sort of seems obvious. Verbal or non-verbal behaviour that would undermine a person's self-esteem. So it's obviously kind of like name-calling, ridicule, put-downs. But labels, identity judgments. You are lazy. What about you're not hard-working? Or you're not working hard enough? Am I making a statement about you and your identity as a person there, which is a violent action, as opposed to talking about something that you've done? Aggressive sarcasm, eye-rolling, ignoring, isolating. These are all ways that we can be demeaning. I think it's important to recognise that all of these things, are human things. Like, we can all do them. They're part of our human frailty to do them accidentally. As I said, when we're tired, when we're hungry, when we're stressed, we think about other stuff. But they can all have that impact on other people, that negative impact on other people. Blame. This is one of the team toxins, and this was stuff that we talked about a fair bit earlier in the year. Blame is an accusation that someone's committed a misdeed. Blame is something that looks at the past. It's a finger-pointing thing. It's saying what happened in the past, who is responsible, who should be punished, basically. As opposed to saying, where are we now? What are the needs that we have now, and who's the appropriate person to take them forward? So it's like comparing the you fucked up with this is a really important problem, this is a serious problem, so how are we going to fix it? Or this is a serious problem, how are you going to fix it? But nevertheless, like the difference between saying this is about what happened in the past as opposed to this is about what's happening now, what's happening in the future. Similarly, and this is one that is familiar to anybody who's been on either side of the advice process, which we all have, I should have been consulted about this. As opposed to, it's important for me to have input. We can't go in a time machine and go back and have you be consulted about this yesterday or 2 weeks ago. But if it's important for you to have input, say that, and have that input now if it's possible, right? Demands. Demands versus requests. This is another kind of big thing that comes out of MVC. Demanding action using coercion. So saying there will be a consequence for you doing or not doing this thing. Sort of force, guilt, intimidation, things like that. So, if you really loved me, then you did this, right? That's the classic example. But, equally, if you were professional, or if you were acting professionally, you do it this way. Or if you don't do this, I'll be angry. As opposed to just requesting it, right? So it's quite similar to the blame stuff. Rather than saying what the consequence is, saying, this is a really important issue, please will you do this? Or this is an important issue to me. Similarly, we come back to these kind of, these unhelpful shoulds. You should have, or you must, versus saying, I need, like, you should have consulted me, versus, I need to have input on this. Right? And this is, remember, this is all about making your message easier for the other person to hear. It's about making the communication more effective. It's about saying, can we talk about this important stuff in a way that deepens the relationship, in a way that continues to keep the environment safe, rather than threatening that sense of safety. And then the final kind that we wanted to introduce today was indirect messages. Right? So not going to people directly and having a conversation with them. X is not doing a good job, or people think that X is not doing a good job. Right? As opposed to going directly to someone and saying, oh, I have this problem with your work. And I think this has to be distinguished from when you're having a discussion that's to prepare for, or to sort of think about going to somebody directly. There's a big difference between saying, oh, I've sort of spotted this thing this person's doing, I think it might be a problem. Could we have a quick chat about that? Because I need to work out whether it's something that I need to bring up with them. As opposed to the only way that you're bringing up is, behind their back. I think, again, it's much easier to do it this way, to be like, to bitch, basically, right? The human urge to bitch. Because having the direct conversation is more difficult. But having the direct conversation is more effective and more fair, and actually only having the direct conversation is more violent because it creates an environment in which it's less safe for that person, right? Because there's just this sort of sense of negativity around that they can't necessarily deal with. You know, yeah, another example, you know, somebody's approached me or someone says you were disrespectful to them as opposed to just going to the person and saying. So those are the examples we looked at: indirect messages, demands, blame, demeaning speech and actions, intimidation, explosion. You know, other kinds, but that is the concept. Very interested to hear people's thoughts, questions, responses, challenges, provocations, feedback.
Who's got any questions?
I find it a little bit, it's a bit eye of the beholder. It's sort of like, well, what happens if you say this to me? So if somebody is generally doing something incorrect or wrong, and it's very much like, oh, you can't say that to me. Well, actually, I need to say this to you. But then if you say that, you're in the wrong. Well, okay, I'm now in the wrong because I've addressed it. But then if you flip it over and return the conversation, it's so ambiguous. I don't find it really comes down to the eye of the beholder. It's not, there's no fixed message, no sort of way to move forward. It's very much, if you take everything that's been said and flip it the other way around, it can just bounce back.
So are you asking, so if, are you suggesting that this can turn into passivity basically? So you end up not being able to challenge people?
If you turn around and I said, Dan, I don't think you're doing this, and you go, well, hang on, though, I think you're speaking to me like this, you've inadvertently now spoken to me in a form that applies to, because you're now stonewalling me. So it's like, well, hang on. Well, we just get into an everlasting loop. There's no result. If I try and communicate something to you and you say, well, you're doing this, well, I can just turn around to you and go, well, actually, you've just done exactly what you told me not to do.
So we had a slide about what non-violence is not, I think just before you came in, which so non-violence is not passivity. It's not about preventing directness or honesty or disagreement or conflict, criticism or anger. Actually enables those things to be expressed more effectively. Okay. So in the case of, like when you say somebody is doing something wrong and you feel you need to communicate that to them, a violent way to be communicating that to them is to say, you do everything wrong. That would be like a massive, aggressive statement about their identity. Or you could say, look, I feel like you're doing this wrong. Like, I need you to do it better, or like, you know, we need you to do it better because, you know, it has consequences if it's not done well. That is a non-violent but still assertive statement. So it's not, non-violence is not about not making that statement. It's about making that statement in a more productive way.
I find it tricky because it's a lot of this comes down to context. So a lot of, you know, if you turn around to me and go, you're doing all this wrong, I guarantee the weeks leading up to that, you've gone, hi, there's a certain part of your work that's not working. And then another week you've gone, there's a certain part of your work that's not working. And eventually, you'll just get pissed off and go, fuck's sake, everything you're doing is wrong, or you'll bypass it. So it's what we're doing is we're picking things that usually is an accumulative effect. And I just believe, this is the middle problem. That surely the previous problem is, you know, why have you got somebody who isn't pulling away? Or why, you know, teach somebody to recognise when they are winding people up, or they're not pulling away. It's sort of very much the emphasis on, you've got to learn to communicate with somebody that's not doing a good job, say, when surely maybe I should start looking at myself as well and figure out when I'm kissing a room full of people. If I walk into work in a pair of hot pants with a dick hanging out, and people start telling me, going, you know, can't be doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and I go, look, would people please communicate with me using non-violent communication? There reaches a point where you've got to look at yourself and go, actually, there's a reason people are communicating with me violently, and it's partly because of my actions.
Well, you know, there's a great line in Khalil Gibran, the Prophet, where it says that the victim is rarely blameless for the crime committed on them.
Yeah.
And I certainly agree there is fault on both sides when there's something, you know, there's always a situation on both sides in creating the situation. What we're suggesting here is that in those situations, non-violence can still help.
Yeah,
the classic example, using the Gandhi example that we mentioned at the beginning, is, you know, it's not like the British were blameless of stuff in India, and yet Gandhi used non-violence to go and achieve what he wanted to achieve, and it can be a very effective way to achieve those things.
What I'm sort of trying to say is, I agree with the non-violent communication, but I think there's also zones to teach people to take responsibility for their actions and what they're doing, and I feel that this this sort of comes after that sort of issue. I'd say once we've got that grounded, then okay, well in the event that people don't recognise these characteristics, then we use non-violent communication.
But how do you teach them?
What were you saying through non-violent communication?
You teach by communicating with them, right?
Yeah, but but also surely the whole point is let's take the restraints of communication, and okay, people will get it wrong, and people won't necessarily get it right, but this actually puts in a fear of like, okay, well, I want to communicate with somebody, but let me grab the book and check I'm doing it properly. So when surely let's open the floodgates first and then align it, not let's get things moving and then get it into the right categories. Let's not just go, right, you're not allowed to do this unless it's done in this sort of fashion.
There's no allowed, not allowed here. This is just a presentation. So
it manages the communication. I sort of feel that let's get the communication flowing first, and then.
At the beginning of the presentation, we mentioned that this is not about setting some rules and saying you should communicate in this way and you should not. That would be self-contradictory, actually, in the case of this presentation. It's just about trying to communicate some principles about what looks like violent communication, why violent communication can be unproductive, and how to kind of recognize it and notice it, so you're no longer object of it. So you're able to say, okay, I feel bad about the way I've just been communicated to. It's because I'm identifying these things that happen, rather than just I feel bad. I'm now going to mope around all afternoon. And it's also about giving us the tools to recognize it when we see it happening around us, so we can approach each other with feedback and say, okay, when you said this to X, I understand what you said, and you're totally right to say it, but you could have phrased it a slightly better way. So there's no rule there restricting your ability to communicate. That's not what it's about.
I'd be curious to see more contacts. It's all very well throwing Gandhi in England into it, but it's not an office-based contact. So I'd be curious to see more circumstance that we can all latch onto and actually.
Can I suggest you start by watching the video after I release it afterwards, because there was a bit of context.
Okay, in that case I apologise. I just.
No worries.
Do you have a hand up?
No.
Just waving her hands in the air.
Do you think we're going to have any internal workshops where we could probably facilitate some conversations? I think that would be really helpful, particularly with what Don's saying. It would help put it in perspective, and I think that's the way that I talked to Justin about it quite a lot. The only way that we can do it is by practicing, and you have to sort of have a willing partner to practice it.
Totally. So, in terms of the stuff that's coming up in the following weeks, things like the check-in protocol, resolution process, part of the stuff that, feedback stuff, I think part of that is going to be saying, okay, what is the comms training that we want to do, and how are we going to go about it, and using one of these presentations about saying, okay, this is the program we're going to have, and using people who are more interested, who've done more reading on this or whatever, to bring those ideas to people who are interested to work on them.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, yeah. Definitely.
I have to agree with Daisy on this, because what you're talking about here is cognitive behaviour, and you can't do that without practicing it.
Yes.
You can't read and learn cognitive behaviour, you have to practice it.
Yeah.
Because you're changing something that's habitual.
Yeah. Anyone else? It's a remarkably question-free session. Okay. Thank you very much for
listening. Do you have
listening.
any questions?
Yeah. Did you guys find this useful? Was this helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it? So does this format of so in this one we didn't go and sort of define a process or try and propose a new process stuff. We just thought this is something that's interesting to know and to share. Does that format work for everyone?
I like the fact that it's something that I feel like I can go away and practice in my own way. So there's no prescribed, here's your challenge for the week or something. There's interesting information. I feel like I can apply it whichever way I want or at any rate that I want. And I like the application to just life and genuinely being happier as a person if you can,
That's what I see as the greatest value of this, particularly. Some of the other stuff as well is that it adds value outside of GrantTree as well, and can be practiced outside of GrantTree. Because this, communicating effectively with all your relationships in the workplace, outside of the workplace, it's important. So to do it more effectively, or to have an insight into tools to do it more effectively, I think is useful for everybody.
you rolling it out in KPMG?